Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. It is Monday, March 31st, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with Times of Israel founding editor David Horovitz and environmental reporter Sue Sirks, reporting on the Gaza envelope today. We'll talk about more of that later. Hi to both of you.
Hey, Jessica.
Good morning.
Hi there. It is day 542 of the war. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has decided to appoint former Navy Commander Eli Sharvit as the next head of the Shin Bet, a choice that opposition leaders have approved of so far, making comments on social media and radio. Meanwhile, the IDF has issued an evacuation warning for Palestinians in the southern Gaza Strip, saying the military is returning to fight with great force in order to eliminate terrorist capabilities. And that followed the prime minister's statement on Sunday that ministers had voted overnight to increase military pressure on Hamas, asserting that the methods were, quote unquote, working to bring about a deal to free hostages held in the Gaza Strip. We'll discuss that decision, as well as U.S. President Donald Trump's threats to bomb Iran if it fails to come to talks about its nuclear program. We will also hear from Sue with updates about what is happening with Kibbutz Kfar Aza, one of the communities in the Gaza envelope. Stay with us. Okay, David, let's start with this IDF announcement today to tell Gazans to clear out of the southern Gaza Strip, following, as we said, the cabinet meeting on Sunday, and that an increase in military pressure is working in terms of the hostage negotiations that have really not seemed to been progressing in any way, or very little. What do we think this actually means in terms of boots on the ground?
Well, it's to clear out of parts of Rafah in southern Gaza where the IDF has fought before. And this reflects a stepped up military operation in the last few days. We don't know specifically what the army is doing in terms of the operations there. But we do know that the cabinet, we were told yesterday by the prime minister, had voted the previous night to step up military pressure. And Netanyahu's conviction is that military pressure is going to enable the achievement of all the goals of the war. He actually set them out in some detail yesterday and spoke even about the day after that Israel will get the hostages back. Hamas leaders will be allowed to leave Gaza, and Israel will then take security responsibility for Gaza in line or on the path to what he described as President Trump's plan, which of course is Trump has since said that they won't be expelling Gazans, but Trump's plan is for a sort of radical redevelopment of Gaza with, I think we have to sum it up at the moment as Gazans being encouraged and enabled to leave, and this Riviera of the Middle East vision that he set out. The statements that you're hearing from the army and that we've heard, we've had evacuations ordered in previous days from parts of the Strip where the IDF is operating, are part of this this latest tactical stage, I would say, of the war. We've not seen massive call-ups. We've not seen mass troop influxes into Gaza. But we are told repeatedly that Israel, by Netanyahu, and the military announcements reflect this, that Israel is stepping up the military pressure on Hamas.
Okay. And then switching gears a little bit in terms of what we are hearing about hostage negotiations, something that we have very high up on our page right now is the 60 Minutes interview with Yarden Bibas, released hostage Yarden Bibas, and other released hostages. And one of the statements that Yarden Bibas, of course, whose wife Shiri and two young sons were killed in captivity, he makes it very clear that he feels that he would not have been released if not for President Trump's actions and words, and that's what needs to move forward on the hostage negotiations in order to get the 59 remaining hostages back. Thoughts about that, David?
Yeah, I think it's part of the same, or it's relevant to the same issue of what the IDF is doing, what the government is doing. What you can see clearly is two very different sets of beliefs about how to secure the release of the hostages, for a start. you have a deal that Israel agreed to in January, which was meant to be a 3-phase deal, in the second phase of which all of the remaining living hostages were to be released, but Israel was to withdraw from Gaza and end the war. Netanyahu did not proceed to the second phase of the deal, has tried to extend the first phase and seek the release of further living hostages without agreeing to the full Israeli withdrawal and an end to the war. And in the interviews that CBS carried out, including, of course, with Yarden Bibas, the conviction that is being expressed there is that this is not going to work, that increased military pressure is going to actually increase the risk to the hostages, both because of whatever the IDF may inadvertently do, heaven forbid, but also because of the way the captors will respond and Hamas's intransigence and so on. And you've got Yarden Bibas appealing to President Trump and saying, I'm only here because of you. In other words, because Steve Witkoff, I assume, part of what he's indicating there is that in January, Steve Witkoff, in the last days of the Biden administration, so with Biden officials, went to Doha and finalized that deal. And the sentiment now is the way to get the hostages out is another deal. And that's what Yarden Bibas is saying, stop the war, get the hostages out. Only Trump can persuade Netanyahu and Hamas to renew this deal. At the same time as the Israeli government is saying, no, that's not how we're going to be approaching this now. We're negotiating only under military pressure. As Netanyahu has said, we're stepping up the military pressure because that's how we think we can get the hostages out. And we're not going to announce an end to the war. We're going to allow Hamas to leave. When Hamas is defeated and its leadership is in exile, the war will be over and Israel will be staying on at some point, presumably, I think, handing over to the Americans if this is genuinely something that Netanyahu intends to do, to rebuild a post-Hamas Gaza. So it's, there's this, especially people listening and following from abroad, and especially, I would say, in America, where this is right now, again, so high in the public's attention, releasing the hostages is an utterly consensual issue. Now, I think it's fair to say it's a consensual issue as well in Israel, but the way to go about it is anything but consensual. It is a hugely politicized issue. And if you are a diehard Netanyahu supporter, in some cases at least, those demanding the honoring of the original deal from January, those demanding a second phase, an end to the war to get the remaining living hostages out, they are at odds with the policy that you support and the government that you support. So, Jessica, you follow this so closely. And I've said this before, because it's so striking, in those two massive party conferences ahead of the American elections, when relatives of hostages took to the stage, tens of thousands of people in both arenas unanimously empathized and made clear their support for the hostage families. There isn't almost no event in Israel, certainly not the demonstrations, but almost no event in Israel where the cause of the hostages is advanced publicly, where everybody is applauding. There will always be hecklers and dissenters. There's tremendous police intervention, shall we say, routine face-offs. There's the combination of everything that we've discussed with wider anti-government sentiment. So this is such a fraught, politicized issue. And, that's what I would sum up. What you've seen, what you saw yesterday in the American television interviews, and you set that against the declared government policy. These are starkly different approaches to getting the hostages home and dealing with Gaza and with Hamas.
And then finally, David, we have President Donald Trump's threats to bomb Iran if it fails to come to talks about its nuclear program. And that's, of course, what we're hearing now. And it feels like a triangle or a square of all these different points that are all related and yet, being dealt with in different ways. So talk to us about that a little bit. Where do we think this connects into where we are right now?
Well, the first thing is, we don't know, and we should always remind ourselves that we don't know. In part, I suspect, because some core decisions have not yet been taken, because realities change very fast here. You have an American administration and with a track record of a determination to try and stop Iran. I think Trump, when he was bidding for re-election the first time, believed that if he could sustain this maximum economic pressure on Iran, one way or another, the regime would not be able to pursue its nuclear program. Either it would feel that it was risking being ousted if it moved ahead, or that there would be whatever measures would need to be taken to make sure it not go ahead. Many years have passed since then. The Iranians are definitely further ahead in terms of missile capabilities. They've got more enriched uranium than they've ever had before, to levels that have no peaceful application. And therefore, much as they may say they are not seeking nuclear weapons, the fact is, and the UN watchdog says the same thing, there is no reason other than a rogue nuclear weapons program for them to be enriching uranium to the levels that they have in the quantities that they have. And now you have Trump back in power and trying to step up the pressure and presenting himself as someone who's trying to stop wars, and at the same time telling the Iranians, if you don't stop, if you don't reach an agreement with us, that means you do not get to the bomb, then there will be, there will be bombing, as he said, and there'll be military pressure on them, the likes of which they haven't seen before. Now, so far, the Iranians are not blinking. Presumably, they want to believe that this is bravado, that Trump is not actually interested in taking actual military action to stop their nuclear program. So it's an incredibly high risk and fraught moment. And of course, Israel is at the heart of it, because the Iranian regime is declaredly seeking to destroy Israel and has helped Hamas over the years to the point of October the 7th, and had its Hezbollah army in southern Lebanon, and is somewhat even significantly weakened by the relative demise of Hezbollah, not eliminated, but much less potent, and by Israel's response to Hamas's invasion. All of this is gathering pace. I mean, we've watched this for years, but every time that a few months pass, you have to assume that Iran is that little bit closer to the bomb. Is it really already a nuclear threshold state? In other words, it could break out very quickly to the bomb if it wanted to. I think people believe that. I'm not sure that we know where they are on weaponization, that third element, right? There's the missiles, there's the uranium enrichment. How quickly would they be able to actually turn their process into actual the manufacturing of bombs? I'm not sure that we know everything that they're up to. I'd like to hope that we do. But sooner or later, this is going to come to a head, and you can hear the rising rhetoric, and two sides, the Trump administration and Khamenei in Iran, who are, I don't want to say playing chicken, but the rhetoric is rising, and at the moment, neither of them is indicating a willingness. I don't think Trump is going to say, "Oh, okay, fine, you can have the bomb." He's saying the opposite. And the Iranians are saying, don't threaten us. It will be, you'll be the ones who'll have to pay. So this is an incredibly fraught period.
Okay. Thanks for that, David. We're going to take a quick break, and when we're back, we'll talk to Sue about Kfar Aza. Stay with us. Okay, so Sue, as anyone following the podcast and your writing, of course, knows that you've been covering the changes and developments in the Gaza envelope area for months, and really want to hear from you today about two pieces that you wrote, again, specifically looking at kibbutz Kfar Aza. The first is an interview with Ami Kahana, who lived in the kibbutz for, I think, 57 years, you wrote, and wrote a book about these last months, about his experiences. He was not home on October 7th, but his wife was and survived. And now he spoke to you in depth about really the nitty-gritty of what is happening to this kibbutz and what should happen for this collective community. So tell us what you came away with, what you spoke about with him.
Well, first of all, it's worth reminding listeners that out of 787 residents, 64 were murdered on October the 7th, and 19 were abducted, and there was widespread physical damage on Kfar Aza. It was one of the communities that was really worst impacted by the Hamas invasion. He is a very clever man, a very curious man. He wrote not only did he live for 57 years on the kibbutz, he wrote his PhD on changing the kibbutzim over 3 generations. And although he's trained as an engineer, today he advises kibbutzim on insurance and risk. So he really understands the sector very well. And in May, he published this book, A Journey Back to the House of Betrayal, which unfortunately is only available in Hebrew. If there's anybody out there interested in publishing it in English, I think it would be a great thing. And it contains the observations that he made during the first 6 months after October the 7th. and recommendations for more on a practical level for making things a little easier. I met him a couple of weeks ago, and he said that his observations had only sharpened since then, and that the community is in a worse state than it was when he wrote the book. Now, the community is split between it's essentially in three sectors, between temporary accommodation in Kibbutz Shvaim in the center of the country, temporary housing in Kibbutz Ruchama in the south of the country, and what they call the diaspora, which is people spread all over Israel, of whom Kahane and his wife Nurit are part. They chose to live by themselves in the north of Israel for what he says is their own mental survival and recovery. He says that you can't, that personal rehabilitation and community rehabilitation just can't happen together. And he said that Shfaim, the people in Shfaim and in Ruchama are basically still stuck on October the 7th. And how can they not be, when every other person you meet along the kibbutz path is grieving? Or when every Saturday night you have to get on the bus and go and demonstrate for the release of the hostages. They will at some point start burying people who were buried outside of the kibbutz, people who fell on the 7th of October. It's going to take years until these people are going to be able to move on and not have it in their face every single day. Interestingly, Kfar Aza was privatized in 2005, and the members got very used to living independent lives. And then came October the 7th, which shattered the whole thing. They had to start living as a community again. They had to make decisions as a community about all sorts of pressing issues, but they already weren't considered to taking each other into account. Now, not only that, but the old communal kibbutzim are run by committees. There's committees for everything. People discuss and they argue, and then they take a democratic vote. But the committees don't exist anymore. The committees that would be needed to take some of these decisions, instead of which they don't have, as Ami said, they don't have leaders, they have managers. And the managers come from outside. They weren't there on the 7th of October. They don't know the social hierarchies. They're very, very busy with external matters. They've had to build 2 enormous sites of temporary housing, and they don't really have the time to listen. And they send out informative WhatsApps to which you cannot reply. And this creates a lot of frustration, a lot of rumors, which can turn into something really bad, said Ami, if it's not treated now. Now, the kibbutz leaders were mostly killed. They were people, the leaders were the people who made up the security teams, and they've basically gone. And there's a need somehow to grow a new cadre, a new leadership. In the meantime, a lot of the young, for example, don't want to come back. They don't feel safe. The Hamas has recovered. And in addition, rather strangely, while around half of the people who were murdered in Kfar Aza were murdered in their safe rooms because they either, walked straight in or blew the doors off or shot through the doors, in people's where a house doesn't have to be completely demolished and rebuilt, people are expected to go back to the same conditions with the same doors. So people are really, really understandably very frightened about going home. Ami estimated that 65% will go back. He thought it would be those who really didn't have another economic alternative to do so. And the thing that struck me most in his book was that he talked about the Exodus. He made an analogy with the Exodus from Egypt. The people who left Egypt did not enter the Promised Land. It was another generation that had not known Egypt, that didn't come with all of that baggage and had the energy to build. And that's what he thinks will happen at Kfar Aza. And he told about, there's a thing called a harchava, an extension that lots of kibbutzim build today for people from the outside, where people can build, a house on a small piece of land, their own private homes. So Kfar Aza did actually build an extension. In the early years, they were too snobby to recognize the people there. Then finally, they allowed the people to become members of the kibbutz, most of whom did. And it was those new people who went on to take leadership positions in the kibbutz, many of whom were killed on October the 7th. A lot of the new housing that's being built now on Kfar Aza is aimed at attracting new families. And he thinks it's those families who did not know October the 7th in Kfar Aza who will build a new community.
Sue, it connects to another story that you have about Kfar Aza, about the October 7th memorial that was built there based on work that Ophir Liebstein, the late head of the Sha'ar HaNegev Regional Council, who was killed, of course, defending his kibbutz, defending kibbutz Kfar Aza. Tell us a little bit about the memorial, which I believe you wrote is the first October 7th memorial that has been erected down south. Is that true? Is that what you wrote?
No, it's the first one in a rural. It's the first one in a rural community. There actually is one on the site of the police station in Sderot. Yeah, one of the problems, again, going back to where the Kfar Aza people are, is they cannot agree on a memorial. A lot of them lost their children in the young people's neighborhood, which was seriously attacked and seriously damaged. And there's arguments, some people saying we won't go back if you destroy it, and some people saying we won't go back if you leave it in its place. And so this memorial has actually been built just outside of the kibbutz. The new neighborhood for youth will be built on another site in the kibbutz, so that destroyed neighborhood will be able to stand for, some more months or maybe even years, I don't know. And it forms, the memorial outside of the kibbutz forms part of a tourist trail telling the story of Jewish settlement in the Negev that was actually the brainchild of Ophir Liebstein, who, as you mentioned, he was actually the first person to be shot dead defending Kfar Aza on October the 7th. And he managed to complete 14 stations along this trail with an architect called Tzvika Pasternak. And on September the 27th, 2023, just days before October the 7th, he marked the opening of the trail. And he had a dream that the 15th station would tell the story about Kfar Aza. Now, after he was gunned down, Pasternak got permission from Liebstein's wife, Vera, to build the memorial. And he's used the same language of the previous 14 sites. So, for example, the story of October the 7th, a map showing where this particular memorial is along the trail, and a QR code linking to a video clip on what happened on October the 7th, inscribed into piping. And that represents the pre-Israeli independence water pipe along which the trail is built. This particular site comprises a concrete path with benches, much like the paths at Kfar Aza, with a metal map of the kibbutz at the end, through which you can see Gaza. Pasternak said because Gaza is such an essential part of the kibbutz life. And a gravel gash representing October the 7th runs through the path. And around it, in metal, are inscribed the names of all the residents who were murdered. But there's a lovely touch, and that is that every name is the actual signature of the person. The idea came from one of the bereaved families, and Pasternak and his team spent a month going through all manner of documents with the family members to find each victim's signature, so that it's almost as if they're alive again. They're taking part in the project. And the other thing was the name. The proposal was made to call the memorial Ktav Yad, which means handwriting in Hebrew. But the families wanted something else. They wanted Ktav Vashem, or writing and name. And when Pasternak pointed out that this was very similar to Yad Vashem, the name of Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, they said, yep, that's exactly what we want. That's what it was.
And so that's, you're saying, available and open for people to visit?
Totally open, yeah. In fact, it's one of the few sites that is open for the public to visit. The other one is the Nova site, about which I will be writing this week, and the different installations there.
All right, we'll hear from you about that as well. Thank you so much, Sue, and thank you, David, for being on today's Daily Briefing. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Sure, thanks.
And thanks to you for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Always feel free to recommend us to other listeners and rate us wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, take care, be well, have yourselves a good week.